Nyangje Khenpo Sodargye Udāna Khenpo Sodargye.Udāna Sūtra The supreme, profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate all beings, please generate the supreme bodhicitta. Today we continue our study of the Udāna Sūtra. The Udāna Sūtra contains a total of 33 chapters across 10 volumes. We have already completed 10 chapters. And we are now studying the 11th chapter. And we still have the 12th chapter ahead. We plan to complete chapters 11 and 12 this year. As for the remaining chapters, we will continue to explain them depending on circumstances in the future. So now we are studying the chapter on ascetics within the 11th chapter. As I mentioned before, this chapter on ascetics mainly discusses the flaws of ascetics who don't practice correctly and the virtues of those who practice the Dharma correctly. They accomplish tremendous merit through their actions, but this isn't discussed much here because the main emphasis is on encouraging us to practice virtue, and whenever defects of body, speech and mind arise, to begin to address them. That's what receives the most emphasis here. Those who wear the saffron robes but fail to uphold the discipline possess harmful views and delight in harm. Such evil ones fall into the lower realms. This verse discusses improper conduct of ordained practitioners, some of their unrighteous actions. In our commentary, it seems there's no previous story for this verse. For the earlier verses, they were replaced by 2 verses and 1 story. So for this one, the main point is there seems to be one in the Udāna Varga, though I'm not sure how fitting it is. In a quiet place, there lived a group of monks whose conduct was not entirely in accordance with the Dharma, yet they had many devoted followers who made offerings to them. In the process of giving, some of the monks developed attachment to worldly possessions, including beautiful and ornate garments. They became fond of soft and delicate robes. At that time, the local mountain deity and tree spirit were displeased with them. They manifested as a person and began to speak to these monks in the form of verses. They said these monks were lazy and gluttonous, like yaks. Upon hearing this, the monks became quite upset and said, "Why do you use such language to attack and revile us?" At that point, the figure replied, "Actually, we didn't directly name you or point at you, but your own conduct fits these words perfectly. You recognized yourselves in what we said." Because of this circumstance, the Buddha also taught verses with a similar meaning. So what is the main point here? Not all ordained people are good practitioners, but no matter what, ordained people wear colored red or yellow robes, the 3 monastic robes. Generally speaking, for ordained people, whether they follow the southern tradition, northern tradition or Tibetan tradition, the size and color of the robes vary. Among the 18 schools of the Shravakas, some have different robes, including their shape and certain markings. These differ too, but no matter what, they are all followers of the Buddha wearing monastic robes. Yet wearing robes is not enough. Some people repeatedly harbor wrong views in their minds. Their 3 doors are not well trained, and they haven't subdued themselves. In this case, they haven't well upheld the discipline of individual liberation. Such a person harbors harmful and perverted views, and their mind stream is filled with wrong views which they share with others. They speak much about negative and harmful actions, teaching harmful views to others. They delight in teaching people about the failings of monastic life or various kinds of knowledge about harmful actions and so on. They emphasize these greatly. In this way, such evil people, those who lead themselves and others into ignorance, fall into the 3 lower realms: hell, hungry ghosts, and animals. The first 2 lines of this verse mainly express the decline of one's own benefit. The latter 2 lines express the harm to others from this perspective. So what does this convey to us? Whether during the Buddha's time or after the Buddha's parinirvana, in this current age there are some ordained people who practice very correctly, possessing pure discipline, studying and practicing diligently, with minds devoted to benefiting both themselves and others. This is very pure. Of course, they may also encounter slander, defamation and attack. These are possible. But no matter what others say, they are the foundation for the happiness and benefit of all sentient beings and the foundation for adorning the country. They are truly worthy of praise. Such ordained practitioners should be like this. Then there are some ordained people whose outward appearance suggests they wear the monastic robes, but in reality, much of their conduct is not in accordance with the Dharma. Wearing the saffron robe and having faith in the true Dharma, they leave home to practice. To be free from the fires of craving, this is indeed difficult. This is how we should express it, I think. It's from the Maharatnakutta Sutra. Some people wear the monastic robe and have faith in the true Dharma as they leave home to practice. Such a person in this world is free from the fires of craving. This is truly precious and rare. There are also those who, though ordained, don't break their vows, but this too is difficult. And there are those who, though ordained, have not abandoned disturbance and confusion. For body and mind to achieve true peace and to practice, this is also very difficult. This is difficult. This is difficult. There are many teachings of this kind, so it seems that ordained people should be very happy without troubles or suffering. But in reality, ordained people aren't necessarily like that. Just because they shave their heads doesn't mean all afflictions are eliminated at once. Especially if the mind lacks renunciation and correct understanding and mindfulness, the ordained life can indeed be difficult to bear. We had 2 young men at our Wisdom and Compassion elementary schools. They were like brothers. One of them had completed middle school and went on to a regular high school and university. The other became ordained at a monastery. The one who became ordained could sometimes study well and sometimes not so well. When the 2 of them met later, the non-ordained one actually advised him, "After all, you are already ordained. If you've chosen the monastic life, then be a true monastic. Just be a good monastic yourself." The ordained one asked him, "Have you ever been ordained?" He said, "No." He replied, "Then you don't understand the suffering of ordained life. Don't tell me what to do." For some time after that, he almost disrobed, but later it seemed he turned out fairly well. So ordained people are not necessarily free from suffering, especially among those ordained whose mind hasn't truly connected with the Dharma. Some ordained people, when they first ordain, may not truly seek liberation. As the Sutra of Nanda's Going Forth explains, there's no true renunciation from such ordination. They ordain merely to escape life, for comfort or to avoid work. Because in secular life, in most films nowadays, what is portrayed? People who can no longer make it in worldly life, then either their business has failed, or they've suffered romantic disappointment, or their health has been attacked by incurable diseases like cancer, and when they've run out of options, they become ordained. But such a person will certainly not necessarily have an easy time in monastic life, because their motive isn't liberation. Of course, some noble people may have this purpose, and some, though without the aspiration for liberation, at least strive to be a good monastic. That's also acceptable. But if neither of these applies, then indeed taking ordination becomes a cause of suffering for both oneself and others. So in one way, ordained people are the same as everyone. After ordaining, it's not as if all social pressure, social criticism, or the complexities within ourselves disappear. It's not. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, when some people first ordain, sometimes they have ulterior motives. We see on the internet nowadays various forms of cyber abuse or other negative information. Some of this indeed stems from the improper conduct of ordained people themselves. But for others, such people initially enter the monastic community and accumulate and wait. When conditions ripen, their misconduct starts to show, including what we see on the internet sometimes, negative reports about Tibetan Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, some negative information. makes it seem like ordained people are actually fighting or are actually committing wrongdoing. But in reality, underneath their robes, they were wearing lay people-esque clothes. I once saw an ordained person who was being cursed online, but actually underneath he was wearing a business suit. He wasn't truly ordained. Some of his actions also reflect this. But the Buddha also spoke of such people in the sutras. These are called lion worms. Some people who aren't true practitioners have entered the ordained community. The Buddha said they are not my disciples, but some impersonate my disciples. And then within a lion, for instance, not actual lions, but as if within them lion worms appear and begin to destroy the body. So some people have all sorts of ulterior motives. Therefore, in society, it's important to analyze things in a balanced way. This is quite important. Without such analysis, generalizing all of this to ordained people seems unreasonable. For example, not long ago, a woman who sold rosewood furniture defrauded a monk. In the end, both were sentenced. But in society, people mainly condemned this ordained person but didn't focus on the other person who committed fraud. And for instance, at the beginning of this year, a woman in Thailand had corrupted many monks. It was indeed a real incident, but when the police investigated, they found 5,600 videos that recorded all sorts of things and 80,000 photos. How did she do this? She initially posed as a Buddhist practitioner entering the monastery and practicing devotedly. She had deep contact with the monks who came to approve of her. She made many offerings initially and showed devotion. Gradually, at a certain point, she began to act improperly. On one hand, she secretly recorded videos and photos, while on the other, she engaged in misconduct. Then she began to extort and threaten. In the end, the money she collected was approximately 120 million yuan. Subsequently, all relevant people went to prison. Yet in society, many Thai people at the time didn't focus much on the person actually committing the fraud in related news coverage. Instead, they emphasized why these ordained people were so unethical. So sometimes we see ordained people seemingly doing something minor or joining with others in committing harmful acts, but ultimately only the ordained person bears the blame. In our worldly society too, for instance, in Thailand in August, there was also much corruption and some ordained people were involved. At that time, many lay people were also involved in doing various things together, including corruption, money laundering, drugs, and other matters. But everyone blamed it all on the ordained people. So whether it's like a Buddhist country like Thailand, which is the same way recently, or elsewhere, the same applies. For example, if an ordained person in a monastery breaks his vows or has misconduct, everyone talks about it. But in any government department, in any government agency, anywhere in the world, if corruption occurs, no one says that all government agencies and all people should never be trusted again. This doesn't happen. So sometimes people seem to have different standards in terms of social direction and trends. There are differences. Whether in Buddhist countries or non-Buddhist countries, of course, when Buddhists engage in misconduct, it's worth pointing out. But this is individual behavior. We don't see it as representative of all Buddhist unethical conduct. There are indeed such beings who fall into the lower realms. I'm not speaking of this degenerate age. Even during the Buddha's lifetime, there were many monks who fell into the lower realms. As I mentioned before, there was a nun called Padma, and with her companions, 500 people were killed at once. From today's perspective, this was a massive tragedy. 500 ordained people were killed at that time. This happened. So when the Buddha was alive, such things occurred. Now it goes without saying. But nowadays, if ordained people do even slightly improper things, social opinion is very difficult to control. But for truly sincere practitioners, this is neither beneficial nor harmful. It may even be an opportunity for practice, a way to transform obstacles into the path. So today, here, we mainly point out shortcomings of those ordained people who don't practice correctly. As ordained people, we should reflect, do we possess these faults?
As a
vine constricts the saltry, so the extremely broken vows become their own bitter enemy, wishing harm upon themselves. This verse concerns what seems to be an evil village official, a kind of local administrator. He asked the Buddha Shakyamuni, Gautama, if someone performs evil deeds of body, where would they be reborn? The Buddha replied that those who break vows and commit such acts as killing fall into hell. Then he taught this verse. It uses a simile to explain, as I mentioned before. The sal tree, as mentioned earlier, is a palm tree, extremely tall, but if a vine, a creeping vine, wraps around it, it will gradually strangle the sal tree. It constricts it tightly, very tightly. Unlike in some places now where vines are quite fine, they may not strangle the tree to death, not like that. But if there are especially thick vines that wrap around the tree completely, eventually it withers and falls away. It dies like this. Similarly, if someone is extremely dissolute, whose conduct is extremely evil, particularly wicked, like the former Devadatta, if they are like that, the Buddha taught in some sutras that in their mind stream not a trace of virtue appears, not a single instance of ethical conduct shows. They are extremely, utterly dissolved. Not only do they harbor harmful intent toward others, but toward themselves as well. They treat themselves exactly like an enemy. Generally speaking, we should have love and compassion for ourselves, right? For others, perhaps not so easily. Some people whose conduct is bad, but those who are extremely wicked have not a shred of compassion for themselves. It's as though they treat themselves as a bitter enemy whom they deeply resent. They conduct themselves in such a manner, and they think the same way. Actually, this is very foolish. Yet indeed, some are like this. I've seen this before. There was a master called Get Sangpa who said that when cultivating compassion, you should first cultivate compassion for yourself. Why? We are cultivating compassion for all beings, right? Why cultivate it first for yourself? Because your afflictions are so severe, your condition is so poor, you should think to yourself, someone like me is truly pitiful. There's no one worse than me in this world. I am the most pitiful, the most base. When you first generate compassion for yourself in this way, then if you transfer this compassion to others, then you can cultivate compassion for them. Otherwise, if you don't cherish yourself at all, without self-love, loving others is simply impossible. When someone's character is too wicked, their mind stream lacks compassion altogether. By the same logic in this practice, there is actually a brief method for cultivating compassion. This is explained in it. So what he's saying here is that some should be recognized as such dissolute beings who stop at nothing to harm themselves. On one hand, they are very ignorant. Indeed, there are some, shall we say, practitioners with particular characteristics. They know clearly that such actions harm them, yet they insist on continuing. Their teachers tell them to stop, but they don't listen. Their parents tell them, but they don't listen. Their Dharma friends tell them, but they don't listen. And their conduct is extremely, dreadfully wicked. Such people have not a trace of Buddha nature in their hearts. Their conduct is particularly wicked. They don't care at all about their own suffering. Such conduct is extremely unreasonable. So here we often teach that compassion for oneself is truly very important. In Mahayana Buddhism, we often teach to view all beings as our mothers, to regard sentient beings as our own mothers. Yet toward ourselves, we seem to have no compassion at all. There was a school in Spain, and they posed a question at that time, how to be compassionate toward oneself. As the topic, I also spoke about some aspects of this. I don't remember what I said then. I've forgotten. But Westerners also emphasize this point. You should first love yourself, then love others. Otherwise, if you lack this value of self-love, then loving others is very difficult. So they consider that some views in Mahayana Buddhism represent a transcendence. Why transcendence? Because you're not even responsible for your own character and yourself. Your own values haven't been elevated. How could you then care for all beings? As a person, if your love for yourself is still insufficient, loving others is simply not possible. For a person's conduct to be normal, you should first focus on yourself, then on your parents, your family, your relatives and friends. But if you have no compassion for yourself at all, if you don't care at all about your own liberation and accomplishment, if none of these matter to you, then everything else is impossible to achieve. So this perspective is not without reason. He indeed, from the perspective of the simile, makes some meaningful points. We who desperately commit harmful acts treat ourselves as hated enemies. We constantly do things that harm ourselves in this life and the next. This is a terrifying thing. A terrorist harms others, yet they themselves have protective skills and protective awareness. We ourselves lack even this sense of self-protection. On one hand, we are very foolish. Why do I say this? Because I have no compassion for myself. I can do nothing for family and others. Of course, this is likely due to deep karmic relationships. If you don't believe in karma, you might think I create harmful karma, but not necessarily I'll experience suffering. They may hold such perverted views. But if you truly believe in karma, you will certainly experience the results of your harmful actions. You accept it yourself. If you don't cherish yourself, how could you have compassion for all beings? So, regarding these principles, we can repeatedly contemplate them, can't we? He mainly explains here that in our commentary it says the Buddha seemed to be residing under a tree, diligently practicing. There was a 120-year-old elder who pulled at the corner of Shakyamuni Buddha's robe and said, "Gautama, why don't you show respect to me? Why don't you bow to me?" He began making this demand to the Buddha. Then the Buddha said at that time, "Whether in the human world or the heavenly realms, in all my time in this world, I have never seen anyone like you who insists on chasing after others to make them bow." What he meant was, among the Brahmins, generally according to their age, the elderly receive bows and respect. They do have this custom. But in our Buddhism, it's not primarily based on age. One factor might be ordination, seniority, the length of time since receiving precepts. More importantly, we look at whether the ignorance and afflictions in their mind stream have been eliminated. If they have eliminated these, even if they're very young, they can still be worthy of prostration. Then he asked that person who should have been a Brahmin or something, he asked that person, for example, when a hen lays eggs, when the chicks come out from the eggshells, which one is the elder? Which one is older? At that time, he said, the first one to come out of the eggshell, that chick should be considered the eldest. The Buddha said, in that case, I am the first in this world to emerge from the eggshell of ignorance as an enlightened one. Therefore, I should not bow to you. The Buddha himself proclaimed, although I am relatively young compared to the Brahmin elders, I am younger, but I emerged from the eggshell of ignorance. I should have come out first. You have not yet realized, you have not yet achieved attainment. Using this approach, he spoke these verses, he spoke 2 verses. This story can also be referenced when the time comes. There's another one about Bhikkhu Nyenga. When he sat together with some elders, others began to mock and ridicule him. At that time, the Buddha, addressing this situation, said that although some are elderly in age, they may not necessarily be worthy of prostration. He spoke from this perspective. So generally speaking, among monastics, this is an old monk, everyone should show respect. This is a new monk, shouldn't deserve respect. There is such a tradition and practice. This does exist, but actually it's not necessarily so. If one is a realized being, then even if you're young, even if you haven't grown old, you can still be worthy of respect. I haven't recited this verse yet. Though one's hair has turned grey, if one has not realized elderhood, their youth is merely wasted and are called an old fool. It says that some people, although of course this elder seems to include elders of caste, possibly elders in terms of age, and also elders in terms of realizing the nature of phenomena. There are several types of elders. But among them, elders of caste, like caste elders, India has different classes, such as royalty and Brahmins. These are all considered higher class people. When they sit, they also sit in the high seats. As for elders in age, normally we say you are elderly, you sit in the chief seat. Then there are elders of Dharma nature. Elders of Dharma nature have realized the nature of phenomena. So here it says that although one's hair has already turned grey, some people's hair when they're young also turns white. Some have patches of white hair here and there. Some people's hair has turned white. But if you have not yet realized the nature of Dharma, have not realized the true nature, this kind of elder is not a true elder. Although your youthful years have passed, you initially formed, then matured. After maturing, you gradually deteriorated. Finally, your youth has ended. Your hair has whitened, your teeth have fallen out, your face is full of wrinkles. Your whole body cannot stand straight, you're bent over and so forth. All kinds of signs of aging have appeared on your body. But this is not a true elder, not an elder of wisdom. What is it called? A foolish elder without virtue. What we call an old man or old guy. There was a leader from our county who often used this term for His Holiness. Sometimes when he spoke, His Holiness didn't really listen. That old man is quite stubborn, he would say like this. In our worldly realm, perhaps for some masters they won't show respect, and for some elderly people they also don't address them properly. But such people, what is this kind of address called? A kind of foolish old person, an ignorant old person, not a true elder. So generally speaking, among monastics, who are the elders? As for elders, it's like this in Theravada Buddhism and also in Tibetan Buddhism. They are quite respected. When an old monk, an old master, an old guru arrives, everyone feels this person must have great merit. In appearance, people also tend to develop faith. But say there's a very mischievous novice, mischievous monastics, their behavior doesn't appear very proper. But if their mind stream is full of afflictions and their conduct is not tamed, then there's really not much significance. So some scriptures mention that although they are elders, they've just eaten more rice, lived more years, had more life experiences, but their actual spiritual attainment hasn't matured yet. So in the Buddhist scriptures, even if you live 100 million years, if the wisdom and compassion in your mind stream haven't matured, you're not considered a person of exceptional merit. If there is someone young in years whose faculties are without flaw, this is called an elder who discerns and practices the true Dharma. It says some people, although they are very young in age, if their faculties are without flaw, then they can be called an elder, and they can discerningly practice the true Dharma. So in the worldly realm, some of us have been here for many years. For example, in the academy for 20 years, 30 years, but if their conduct is also not proper and no merit has arisen in their mind stream, they've just stayed here for a long time. Other than that, nothing else. Having stayed for so many years, it's like a stone dwelling in water for 100 years. Its nature is still dry. Some people come for a very short time, but their conditions, their maturation, all aspects are relatively quick. Then in a short period of time, they can propagate the Dharma and benefit beings, and their own mind stream can also be transformed. So sometimes, of course, in our worldly realm, it's not good to have no rules either. Now look, for you to graduate, it takes 15 years. On the government side, they say it takes 8 years. Including completing the sequence of each class level, it requires a certain number of years. This is also the case for most people. The academic system and years are also necessary. But some people don't need to go through such a long time. In a short period of time, their learning, contemplation, and practice become perfectly mature. But most importantly, I think one is studying the 5 major treatises, including the tantric sections. Completing these thoroughly, quantitative completion is also very important. But more importantly, seeing whether this person can truly enjoy the truth of Buddhism themselves. This is very important. If you've stayed for many years but haven't practiced well yourself and haven't tasted the nectar-like flavor of Buddhism, then whether you obtain a Khenpo certificate or Khenmo certificate, or whatever vast learning and scholarship, extensive knowledge and titles and honors, they may not be particularly useful. If the afflictions in your own mind stream can truly be destroyed, and you yourself have some realization through meditation. I'm not talking about wisdom from hearing. Wisdom from hearing, everyone just listens and listens, then contemplates a bit. Everyone will have this. But what truly comes from practice, even 100 wise people, 1,000 wise people cannot change what you have tasted of Buddhism, including emptiness, great compassion, and such truths, cannot be taken away or diverted by others. Such a state of realization, even if you stay here for just a short time, can still be experienced. So I think for all of us gathered here, on one hand, we need to study translation, study the 5 major treatises, obtain certificates, and then everyone starts applauding below, and you yourself feel especially proud. You keep wanting to close your mouth but really can't help it. I see whether it's worldly people or renunciates, when receiving awards they keep wanting to laugh. Some do it deliberately like this, but still with delight they keep wanting to laugh. On one hand, this is important. But on the other hand, truly the daily study and contemplation of Buddhism, if you yourself can feel it within this, then all worldly things, fame, wealth, and every kind of pursuit, seem trivial in comparison. Any fame and profit that worldly people now pursue, all kinds of reputation and material gain, for such a person are not worth mentioning, have no significance. But if we haven't tasted the true essence and nectar of the Dharma, if this is the case, then whether it's pratimoksha vows, bodhisattva vows, or many behaviors, they also become increasingly improper, or in one's conduct. various different behaviors will also appear. So the most crucial thing is always through oneself, because this cannot be taught by others, through your own meditation. Especially now we're teaching the secret mantra, right? I don't know how your study of secret mantra is going. In the secret mantra, you should be able to experience the true essence of secret mantra. This is the most important teaching of our Tibetan Buddhism. If you haven't tasted this, no matter how well you study logic, how well you keep the precepts, the 4 reasonings of Madhyamaka Prasangika, the unique reasonings, no matter how much, I think perhaps you still wouldn't be considered the most excellent person in Tibetan Buddhism, because Tibetan Buddhism has such wonderful tantric teachings. If we haven't tasted this, it's somewhat regrettable. What is called a true elder? As for elders, it's like this. Whoever abandons good and evil, practices the pure Brahma conduct, cuts off the aggregates and practices, they are called an elder. This doesn't seem to be in the commentary, but in the Udāna Varga or some other sutra, after the Buddha attained enlightenment, the 6 teachers were always dissatisfied. Once, through King Prasenajit, who came to ask the Buddha about some matters, at that time they said the 6 teachers, like Purana Kassapa, they had also been practicing for so many years, practicing for decades. But the Buddha, before age 29, enjoyed the pleasures of the palace, just left home, 6 years of austerities by the river, and then attained realization. So did the Buddha really attain Buddhahood? They had King Prasenajit ask. At that time the Buddha replied, I have indeed truly awakened. Then they asked, how were you able to do it in such a short time? Because indeed, if someone has wrong views, they can say this about the Buddha too. Before 29, enjoying the palace and such, then 6 years of austerities, then coming out, they didn't believe it. The Buddha at that time gave these analogies. In the world there are several analogies. One is a venomous snake. When it breathes out angry fire, it can burn forests. And a small spark, a small fire seed, can also burn a very large grassland. And like someone young, even if young, when undefiled wisdom and miraculous powers arise in their mind, they can eliminate all afflictions. And also some princes in the world, the crown prince of a king, but when he takes hold of great power, all of the royal authority in the future can be held in his hands. So if the time is short, it doesn't necessarily mean failure in the world. So with this reasoning, he can also explain here. So what this means is, what is a true elder? Actually here it mainly talks about elders, whoever, any person who has eliminated, abandoned the causes and effects of good, the causes and effects of evil, and practices the pure Brahma conduct. The pure Brahma conduct of the Eightfold Noble Path is purified. All 5 aggregates are completely eliminated. Whenever we have grasping at the aggregates, when there's grasping at the aggregates, there is self-grasping. When there's self-grasping, there is karma. And after there is karma, there is continuing in samsara, just as explained in the Nagarjuna's precious garland. So if one eliminates the 5 aggregates and practices, then this is the path of no more learning. Such a path of no more learning is a true elder. In our commentary, it also says the path of no more learning is the great elder who truly benefits beings. Actually, whether it's the Shravaka vehicle or the teachings of our first turning of the wheel, it should be the true path of no more learning. Actually, it is to benefit sentient beings. Benefiting sentient beings is our greatest purpose. Therefore, he says here, a true bhikkhu, a true elder, one who has attained arhatship or attained the fruit of a noble one, can be considered a true elder. So here, whether it's what we discussed earlier about discipline or about ascetics, these are all quite lofty standards. Usually when we speak of ascetics here, sometimes we may not explain it so clearly. Without precepts, speaking lies, shaving the head does not make an ascetic. The fool immersed in desire, how can they be called an ascetic? Here it also discusses how at that time there seemed to be a person carrying a staff and a Brahmin who asked the Buddha, if someone outwardly practices as a ascetic or bhikkhu, are they truly a bhikkhu and ascetic? It seems in some southern region there were also some Brahmins and some bhikkhus who maintained external conduct, outward appearances, doing very well but actually breaking precepts, doing evil, behaving quite poorly. Is this really a true Brahmin or monastic? They asked this. At this time the Buddha used these 3 verses, the next 3 verses about not an ascetic, actually it seems to be 3.5 verses, he used these to answer. First of all, as a monastic, because here ascetic mainly refers to monastics. As a monastic, you must have pratimoksha vows in your mind stream. If you don't have the essence of pratimoksha vows, then you're not a monastic. Secondly, for monastics, the most crucial thing is not speaking lies. In Chinese areas, they often say monastics don't tell lies. Not telling lies, not speaking them. Lying is very serious, right? If you speak lies, everything else, including whether you have the vow essence in your mind stream, didn't we discuss this earlier? Lying is very serious. If you don't have precept in your mind stream, your speech and conduct are all improper, and you also speak lies. In this case, although you appear to have shaved your hair and beard, you are not an ascetic because inside you are empty, you have no precepts. Your conduct is improper, although your head is shaved and you have no beard. But now it seems in Chinese areas there are also some old monks like Master Xu Yun. Many have quite long beards, and in Tibetan areas too. In any case, whether you have hair or a beard, no matter what, even if you shave, actually if you don't have the inner essence, this doesn't look like a monastic. Now many young people also shave their heads. There are all kinds of behaviors, including those tourists who come to Larungar. Sometimes they shave their heads, wrap themselves in a shawl and take a few photos over there. Some of them seem like they're specifically acting in a movie, wearing a bag on their head. Seems like all the hair is rolled up inside and you can't tell. There are all sorts of things. So there's really no difference from this. So this kind of foolish person, actually they are drowning in the pit of desire, in the desire realm. So outwardly they appear to be ascetic, but are they truly ascetic? Their behavior is not peaceful at all. At that time it seems the Buddha was teaching at Jetavana monastery. This should be in some other sutra, I've forgotten. When teaching, at that time the Buddha's teaching seemed to be known by people from 16 countries, and then many people began to ordain. When they ordained, their income was very high. There were especially many people making offerings. Then nearby fishermen, some butchers, people of low caste, all began to ordain. Later the Buddha began to rebuke them, saying they were like hungry tigers or birds that catch fish and so forth. The Buddha rebuked them, saying they had no renunciation mind, they weren't true monastics, and had them expelled from the Sangha, drove them out of the monastic community. Yes, this happened. So including nowadays at some sacred mountains during the summer retreat, because the income is relatively high, many nearby locals, farmers, they all shave their heads and enter inside. And after the retreat is finished, they just go back. So now some monasteries have begun to stop this, saying if you don't have a real Sangha certificate, don't have a real ordination certificate, you cannot do the retreat. So since ancient times, there have been monastics with this appearance, but in the true teachings of our Buddhism, these don't belong to true monastics. They are a kind of pretender, like actors playing the role of monastics. Such monastics cannot represent the true Sangha. Although through their improper behavior they might tarnish Buddhism's image somewhat, actually they cannot really destroy Buddhism's true face, because the true teachings of Buddhism are actually mostly in our hearts, deeply rooted, and not in behavior. In behavior, there might temporarily be some decorum, but this kind of decorum, Buddhism itself also teaches when discussing renunciation, bodhicitta, and non-dual wisdom. It speaks about how the mind is very important. So this kind of appearance actually may not necessarily cause great harm to the Dharma. Therefore, Buddhism itself also teaches those without precepts, without practice, they are a group of fools, not true ascetics. They are not true ascetics.
Terjig mechang arzan manam go upchang gebjong man ganjig digba jinjer dem khebe gebjong yimbar shi.
Without precepts, speaking lies, shaving the head does not make an ascetic. Whoever pacifies evil, the wise know as a ascetic. What we discussed earlier, this part begins discussing the path of seeing, below discusses the path of cultivation. Some have no precepts and also speak lies. Although they shave their hair and beard, they are not true ascetics. So these people are not ascetics. What then is a true ascetic? A true ascetic, some people through wisdom eliminate delusions of view. All these afflictions to be eliminated by view are completely cut off. Delusions of cultivation tend to be eliminated through cultivation.
주로 통방 위 삼계 주로 공방 정
440, how much?
통방 공방이 강성 공바 무엇 그나나 지원을 야답전이 저 깊적이 공방 지적 되는 점 다시나 지겨 좀 다들
In the gateway to knowledge, it should be. The Mahayana Abhidharma and the Hinayana Abhidharma's delusions of view and cultivation are somewhat different, right?
야간이 제가 지리지 제가 공부 가서 게 잘하면
414 seems like 16 are eliminated through cultivation. It seems today's sound is not very good. You can't hear very clearly. The meaning is, the question I just asked, the Khenpo said he couldn't understand because originally there was no problem, but blame it on this microphone.
설나지 와자 버 Фирнас говорите. Яна, 종교 대답점이 많아. 대답점이 있는데.
Should be 112 and gunbang is 16.
말도요, 말아. 다행히
Not that one. I mean, upper Abhidharma, lower Abhidharma. First is the delusions of view. Through eliminating delusions of view, one doesn't enter the lower realms. This kind of wise person, the wise know as a ascetic, such a wise person can be called a ascetic. This kind of wise person is a ascetic. Without precepts, speaking lies, shaving the head does not make a ascetic. Whoever thoroughly observes all great and small evils, today's sound is really not good. Originally we invited many people. It should be a bit better. But today, what's the reason today? There's been an echo all along.
Yeah, so Shirna Nazi
Can pacify them all.
Then I think
that one is called a true ascetic. Could it be something from your control room? Maybe a little issue with the setup? What happened? What? Oh, couldn't find the reason.
Ah.
But it's okay, we're almost done anyway. Mainly without precepts, then speaking lies, although they've shaved their head, they're not an ascetic. So what is a true ascetic? Through the wisdom of the path of cultivation to observe all the latent afflictions in the three realms, great and small evils are destroyed, all pacified, then this is called a true ascetic. A true ascetic actually is sometimes also called a perfect ascetic, sometimes called an ultimate ascetic. This is a true ascetic. All right, now we're almost finished.
Tramzerte Zorosho par Gebjoyan, Odakatama Rapanga Tina Rapto Shonji Jut.
Eliminating evil makes one a Brahmin, practicing peace makes one an ascetic, abandoning one's own defilements, this is called leaving home. Here it mainly discusses how there was a person, a Brahmin named Fire Offering, who asked the Buddha about Brahmins, ascetics, and renunciates. What are the differences among these three? The Buddha said actually these three are explained from different angles. Let me explain the last verse. The meaning is that Brahmin, actually Brahmin also means a renunciate. Among the Brahmins in India now, there's a group of renunciate Brahmins who are worthy of everyone's offerings. So the meaning here is that these three are synonyms, the same meaning. How to say it? First is eliminating evil, eliminating afflictions like greed and so forth. This is called a Brahmin. Outwardly, they also display the appearance of a renunciate. Then practicing peace. Practicing peace mainly means pacifying the afflictions in one's own mind stream. Mainly, a person whose conduct of self-benefit and benefiting others is pure is called an ascetic. For ascetics, practicing peace, this includes benefiting self and others. There's this, the commentary seems to have this, abandoning one's own defilements, eliminating from within the heart the root afflictions and latent afflictions. In this case, what is this called? A renunciate. So for us renunciates, actually it's eliminating the defilements in the mind stream, not just wearing red robes, wearing a kasaya, shaving one's head, and this is called being a renunciate. Actually the most crucial thing is in the mind stream, whether there is a virtuous mind, virtuous roots. This is very important. It seems in the Sutra of the Collected Stories of the Buddha's Deeds, it also says, I now wish to seek liberation for all the world, therefore I leave home to practice the path. Just leaving home, it's not merely for oneself to leave home, it should be for all the world. For all sentient beings to obtain liberation, this is very important. If we don't leave home in this way, outwardly appearing to be a renunciate but actually not being one, if in one's mind stream one has truly eliminated afflictions, although some may outwardly not be renunciates, actually they can be renunciates. Like the layman Vimalakirti, outwardly he appeared to be a layperson, but all afflictions and defilements in his mind stream were eliminated, so he should be considered a true renunciate. A true renunciate is one who benefits others with pure conduct. In the past there was an old monk I greatly admired called Master Guangqin. Later he went out to propagate the Dharma. In his lifetime, it seems, he built 7 or 8 monasteries. His most important principle was what? Leaving home is not for having a good life. It's not to escape from life, eating very well, dressing very well. It's not like that. If we as renunciates are always thinking in our hearts, about how to enjoy, how to be happy, thinking about this all day, then there's not much difference from lay people. It's just perhaps shaving one's head, wearing a kasaya. There's a bit of merit in planting virtuous roots. Other than that, there's nothing. Perhaps most crucially, as just mentioned in the Sutra of the Collected Stories of the Buddha's Deeds and also in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, so we leave home precisely to benefit sentient beings, to enable beings to attain liberation. In the future, when there's opportunity, we should in different places, like I just mentioned, some old monks in their lifetime established so many practice centers outside, especially in more accessible places. If we build more practice centers, it's very meaningful for planting virtuous roots in beings. And it's not for oneself to have a better life, to be more peaceful. Of course, retreat and such, on one hand, these are very good. But most importantly, actually, whether monks or nuns, if one has this aspiration and all conditions come together, it should be possible. So as ascetics, for the benefit of self and others, we should do more virtuous deeds, especially propagating the Dharma and benefiting beings. This is for Mahayana ascetics the most important conduct. Chapter 11 completed. Good.
Bandara Bandara